Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Killoy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. Welcome back to the Military Veteran Dad. I would like to personally welcome you to 2020. I am your host, Ben Killoy, and if this is your first time listening to this episode, welcome. We dive into weekly topics, weekly conversations with military dads, authors, really anybody that can bring perspective, value, and hope to our lives to help us move from the dad we are today to the dad we are tomorrow. I want to do a special episode here right after the New Year's to kind of talk about where the podcast has been and where the podcast is going. So for the first year, my main mission was to dive into the space, figure out what military veteran dads needed, figure out the community that military veterans dad needed, and ultimately just create the friendships that I needed to move this podcast forward. And I would say I've successfully done that. That mission has been accomplished. And as we go forward, the biggest theme out of all of this has been legacy. Legacy has been something that comes back over and over and over. And if you're a longtime listener, you know we talk about it a lot on the podcast. I've done a solo episode on it. And in 2020, we're going to come out with a series of products called The Legacy of Fatherhood. It's going to be kind of a platform of products from courses and ebooks and even some speaking events, but it's all going to be under the umbrella of The Legacy of Fatherhood. And all of that will help you, the dad, come home. Because if you're like me, you would sit at home listening to yourself talk to yourself in a very negative way. You'd have conversations with yourself that would just leave you feeling miserable, alone, and empty. And those emotions are so hard. I can't tell you how many times I just sat there and felt worthless for over the last even 15 years since I left the Marine Corps. But those especially when your kids come along, those feelings that you're dealing with, those feelings of just sitting in a pile of muck, that has to be dealt with. And in order to deal with it, you've got to have a strong why. And the strongest why that I've come to as a military dad is our legacy of our family. We're going to be launching a new logo beginning with this episode, and it's going to strengthen that our legacy is our family. And that is the key principle, key pillar of being a military dad and understanding what it means to come home. We're going to be coming out with a bunch of different ideas related to this legacy of fatherhood. And a lot of this will be some basic stuff, but oftentimes that's some of the best stuff. We don't want to do complicated stuff. We want to do the basic stuff. So just to summarize, we're going to have the Legacy of Fatherhood platform. We're going to have courses and ebooks related to that topic. We're going to launch a new logo, reinforcing that brand. Now that we will also have this brand, we'll also be coming out with apparel online as well, so keep staying tuned for that. And more importantly, the Facebook group that we've got, which currently has 64 dads into it, and that might sound like a low number, but I'm super proud of it because every one of those 64 dads came on their own free will. I haven't promoted it. I haven't done anything other than just continue to talk on the podcast about being a military dad. And that's 64 people that have heard the message and wanted more. And that group is where we're going to be deep diving into the legacy of fatherhood and what that means. What are the pillars? What are the principles that you need to be a strong father? What are those principles to create a strong legacy? These are all things that we're going to deep dive in the Facebook group. And the best part of the Facebook group, I remember the first Facebook group that I joined a while back, there was just a feeling of loneliness. Like, I remember the very first time I heard a podcast, it was the Dad Judge podcast, and he was talking about the Facebook group. I wanted to feel like I belonged to something. I hadn't belonged to something since the Marine Corps almost. And this feeling of belonging, and then instantly when you're in there, everybody was helping everybody, and it was just a strong brotherhood of like-minded men thinking and doing life with a similar objective to be a good dad. That feeling helped cancel out some of those thoughts that I had of not being good enough,
those feelings of not being good enough in my marriage, not being good enough in my career, not being good enough in my parenting. All of those were feelings that I was holding inside. Those were judgments I was holding on myself. And those judgments really prevented me from being able to create any type of human connection around me, because internally I said I was a piece of shit. And until I externally had that validation that I wasn't, from a group of like-minded men that I could help and they could help me, because let's face it, men like helping others. And when you're helping other dads, you ultimately help yourself because you're working through your own problems often. And often you get a little bit of significance with that as well. Like you feel significant because you helped something else. And that significance is a big driver of our human needs and our human behaviors. We have a strong desire to feel significant. Next, I kind of want to talk about where we did also do in 2020. So next, I want to quickly dive into the stats of what 2019 looked like. So in 2019, we downloaded 6,360 times throughout the course of the year. And in November, we hit our best month ever at 140. And a little background about each episode gets about 60 downloads in the first week. And generally, each episode goes up to about 175 downloads through each episode. And then everybody else kind of moves on to the next episode. But overall, the podcast continues to keep going. And it's those little episodes that people get, those little bits of wisdom that I know are helping dads. And if you listened to last week's episode where I read that review, that was a really powerful review of how this podcast is changing lives. We've had 3 bonus episodes. We've had one of the most popular episodes we've had was 10 Minutes Together with Alyssa Van Lingelveld up back in about March or April timeframe. It's the very first one. I'll include a link of it in the show notes down below. That episode continued to top the charts throughout the entire year, and I still use 10 minutes with my kids. If you want to ask any of my kids what they want to do, they'll always be coming up to daddy and say, hey, daddy, can I have 10 minutes? Because 10 minutes is all you need. And that was a big lesson that Alyssa taught us in the beginning of the year. We had Nick Maytash in the summertime frame. He taught us about how our emotions, which is something I talk about a lot as well, about how our emotions need to be a river flowing through us, not a dam that we're trying to hold back. And then we also had Chris Hoffman in October, who brought a impactful story about how to take your story of having a fatherless home and turn that into an ambition. And then also how to kind of re-identify your identity on the other side of transition and try to turn your passion project into something similar to this podcast as well, because I've been a long friend of Chris Hoffman, and he runs the Ambitious Vet podcast as well. With that segue of the 5 solo episodes that I did in the winter, I'd like to formally announce that starting this Friday, I'm going to be bringing a weekly additional episode of just me on the microphone. So that means that on Monday, we're going to have an interview show, but on Friday, we're going to bring just me to the microphone weekly. There's been a lot of things that I want to say, and I often find that I don't have a good platform to say them, but I have a podcast, so we're just going to expand the amount of episodes that we bring and bring more solo episodes. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to call it yet, but I know I don't want that to stop me, because I want to start this value bringing to you guys, the listeners. So we're going to start on Fridays. If you have an idea for what you want if this series sounds good idea, if you got a good idea for what to brand it, drop me an email, ben@militaryveterandad.com. You can go on Instagram at Ben Kaloy, or on Twitter at Ben Kaloy, or I'm on Facebook as well. You can drop me a message there. Wide open to ideas, but like I said, right now, I'm not going to let that stop me. So I'm going to dive in, start publishing on Friday, and bringing you anywhere between 5 to 20-minute episodes. I know my first solos were more targeted at 20, but I really kind of just want to start sharing stories about my life and what I learned from them, and then just really dive into a lot of different topics that I often don't get enough airwaves time to dive into. So that's going to be coming on Fridays, and you can look forward to that this Friday. So we're going to start a Friday episode, and then we're going to continue the Monday episode where we bring everyday guests just like you, military veteran dads, to the podcast. Something we're going to maybe shift with the Monday episodes is we're going to bring more authors into that. There's a lot of knowledge out there that isn't necessarily inside the military community, but they definitely have something to teach. So I've got a lot of marriage guests lined up in this We're going to be bringing a lot of marriage guests in this first month of January. I've got a lot of different guests. There's one episode that is just going to knock your socks off. It's an author. I won't foreshadow it too much other than the title of the book that she has is Open Her Up, which is essentially open up the beauty and the wonder that is your wife and to experience that full beauty of your wife and her power and her ability to resonate and build fulfillment in your life as well. It was an amazing episode. I can't wait to get that one out there. So watch that for that one coming up. But that Monday episode is going to be more about educating and bringing you guys different value for different things on those days. So I'm super excited about 2020. I know there's lots of things going to be coming down. I know there's lots of things that I don't even know you're going to come coming down because they haven't happened to me yet or they haven't come into my life yet. But that's the best part of this whole exercise is that we simply just need to keep swimming, as Dory says, and as the opening has, Dory won. She just needs to keep swimming, and things will keep happening. So military dads, this is Ben Cloy signing off, and I will talk to you again on Friday.